Welcome to our podcast. This is Friends on Fire.
I'm Mike. I'm a lifelong devotee of financial independence. I even wrote a book about it.
And I'm Maggie, a newer convert, but just as passionate, especially on the intersection of minimalism and financial independence.
We're one and the same.
We are two like-minded friends who believe that talking about money with your friends and family opens the door to financial well-being.
The Friends on Fire podcast is about dispelling myths, building financial acumen, and sharing your financial independence journey with the people you care about.
This is Friends on Fire. Hi, Maggie. Was that a deep sigh?
I didn't think that was going to be part of the recording.
No, I think it's part of the intro now.
That was a deep sigh. I'm having a stressful morning.
Well, what always cheers you up is recording an episode of Friends on Fire.
That is true. Hey, Mike. I feel like I didn't get in my hey, Mike. Hey, Maggie.
All right, we'll do it again. Hey, Maggie.
Hey, Mike. Hey, Maggie. Oh, no, I'm Maggie. Hey, Mike.
Oh, my God.
I know.
I think we
like
need to
mess
just
with
jump
you.
into this.
Okay. We're going to talk about, when we were just talking about which episode we were going to record this morning, and I was having kind of a rough day / yesterday and today. And you were like, well, why don't we do whichever one's going to make you happiest? And I was like, that's so nice of you, Mike. So we're going to talk about purging, letting stuff go, some epiphanies you've had on the baseball card front, etc.
Yeah. And I think this is right up your alley because, as everybody knows, you are passionate about minimalism.
Yes, I am passionate about minimalism. But one thing people should know about me is I have come to the realization that I want less stuff, and I'm really good about buying less stuff, but I still have a lot of stuff, and I've let go of so much over the years, but I still am incredibly frustrated by the volume of things in my home. And I am always on some level of a mission, as my husband knows, of just being overwhelmed by the volume of stuff I still have. And I only mention that to say I'm not like some sort of like perfect minimalist or even good minimalist. I think I'm an aspiring minimalist is what I'd call myself. But it is just this like constant journey. And I'm excited for the discussion we're going to have today because I've lately, in the past couple days and really like couple weeks, been in one of the phases I sometimes go through where I'm particularly overwhelmed by just a lot of other things going on. And when that happens, my stuff is just another layer that adds to that overwhelm. And it's like when things are clean and peaceful and there's not crap everywhere in my house, I feel so much better than when I'm like tripping over things and there's just not places to put stuff. And so that was a lot of context.
That was a ton of context.
I'm excited
Thank you
for this conversation.
Robust setup to this episode.
Why don't you share what initially inspired this particular topic?
Yes. So I grew up with a ton of collections, and it brought me just such great joy and satisfaction. Collecting, managing, enjoying these items. I collected baseball cards, comic books. For some reason, I had a whole collection of PC Gamer magazines because when you put them all up on a shelf in order, they spelled out stuff and had designs which would go for years. And so I thought it was really cool. And I held on.
That's really
these.
Clever on their part.
Yeah. And so I held on to these for a long time. I collected rocks, coins, Star Wars toys. And yes, I was a nerd.
I was going to say there's one theme here.
Yeah. Anybody with like strong collection needs is typically pretty nerdy. But it was so satisfying growing up. I really had so much fun with these things. And you mentioned the word journey. Over time, these things have played a different part of my life, have provided different values, and that value has, in many cases, gone away. And as I have kind of grown up and moved on, all of these things I have been giving away at different points. And it's kind of an interesting reflection and psychological experiment to understand like why at some point something that you had been holding on to at sometimes with a lot of work behind it now no longer matters. You can give it away and feel good. And so that's what we want to talk about. We want to talk about tips for letting go and some of the things that people collect over time, not just collectibles, and how you might evaluate it and simplify your life. Because I agree with you, Maggie, there's a ton of benefit to it. And whether you realize it or not, having all this clutter can add to anxiety.
It weighs you down.
Yeah.
Yeah, it weighs you down mentally and physically. And often financially, I would argue.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
So Maggie, what did you collect as a kid?
Well, I was excited to see that you collected rocks because I had a very large rock collection. I was like really into, and you know what?
What?
I still have 90% of them.
Me too.
Because they're so small, many, many years ago, I packed them all. Rocks and gemstones I collected. I would say it was a budding gemstone collector. I had them in those little micro magnifying glass cases that were like real small. I could whip, I mean, it's in the closet right here behind me. I could whip it out.
They're back here for me.
Been in a box for like 30 years probably, or no, maybe, probably since I got, out of high school or something. I still had them like when I was in high school, speaking of nerd alert, I still had them like on display in like my room on these shelves. And I remember like dusting around that. It was my pride and joy. Anyways, I collected rocks. As I'm doing stuff like that, I'm like, you know what? You're able to just say I collected rocks, and I need to tell you a lot about how I collected rocks. I also
and here is my fifth favorite rock. It's blue.
I also had a music box collection, and those are the only music boxes. You know what a music box is?
No.
They're
like
very
with the one like the ballerina pops out and
yeah, but that's more like that's a one type of them, but they're decorative and they like there's like a bass, you twist it and they play different songs. I mean, I had small ones. I had ones that were very decorative. I had like porcelain ones. I'm not sure what started it, but I had like 15 or 20 of them and I still have a bunch of them now. It's a good example of something. It's like in a box in my kids' room. They don't want them. I should get rid of them. But anyways, we'll maybe by the end of this episode, I'll be inspired to think about how I could let go of them. They have sentimental value and they're nice. So I don't want to they're not junk.
I also, over the years, collected a number of sentimental items, particularly from my parents and grandparents, who I admired very much.
Like what kind of stuff?
Oh, like furniture or kind of like desk items that my grandfather had in his office, or things from his work experience. So, we've talked about it a few times. He was very high up in the Ford Motor Company, and back when they were like the largest company in the world. And so he's this very high powered, successful executive. And so I really look up to his success and have some of the things that, Henry Ford gave to him. And so those are meaningful to me.
That's pretty cool.
But so over time, everybody accumulates stuff, and it can be these collectibles, it could be heirlooms or things just of practical value. But at some point, and we would argue at frequent points in your life, you should take a step back and evaluate whether or not you really need all these things. And so that's where we're going to kind of go through all the different categories today.
Can't wait.
So to start off, the first one, which I love because there's this financial aspect to it, your collectibles, so your baseball cards or your Beanie Babies, you have to understand that they are worthless. And
typically.
No, they're worthless.
Well, I mean, some collectibles aren't.
They're
the majority
mostly
of things you think are collectibles are worthless.
Let me finish my thoughts, and then we will establish whether or not they're worthless or not.
Well, I'm just saying you use the word usually in the show notes. So.
So this was a painful realization for me, because on my baseball cards specifically, I had been collecting them for a decade when I was a kid. And at that time, there was a strong market value for them. And part of my desire to collect them was that they had value and that I could buy and sell them and trade them. And these were an item that had some commercial value to them. When something is sold as a quote unquote collectible, what you have to realize is that it's not. The time has passed. So, baseball card specific example, Mickey Mantle rookie card, very famous, expensive baseball card that's out there. When it was made, it was not a collectible. It was a cheap souvenir for kids. And it was decades later that people developed a desire for it and for that person. And it became collectible because of its scarcity. Baseball cards that were sold decades later in packs and in baseball card stores had already been built up and manufactured as a quote unquote collectible to kind of perpetuate this need that had been developed with actual rare cards. And so if you are buying something like Beanie Babies or baseball cards or comic books or something that has an industry around it already, it's no longer collectible. It's no longer has value. Even if there's a market for it, the long-term value has been eliminated from it. This is going to be painful for people to hear.
Yeah, I have a number of things that I would never even have sort of, I guess, used the word collectible on, but that I have struggled to let go of because I think it's probably worth something. Like I have a bunch of like Fisher Price, like a Fisher Price record player. You know what I'm talking? You remember those? And they're worth like, I remember looking on eBay a while back and it was like, maybe you would sell for $15 or $20.
So let's look now, Maggie, let's do a little experiment. And I recommend everybody do this. So look at your collection of whatever and find what you consider or what you had thought to be the most expensive item in your collection. This is what I did with my baseball cards. I had 2 or 3 that in the peak were worth a few $100s a piece. I looked them up on eBay and see what they're asking for and then which ones have bids. What I saw, which was depressing, but then also liberating, was that the asking price was in like the $1 to $3 range, and none of them had bids. So what are you seeing right now on your Fisher Price record player?
Yeah. Well, I'm not I think in the app it's easier to like sort by recent sales, but I will say there's a bunch of buy it nows in conditions that are better than mine with all 5 records. I think I'm missing 1 record. It's $14.99 plus $10 shipping.
Mm-hmm.
There's another one that's buy it now that's $22.99. There's some of, I need to, I know you can filter to recent sales, which, let's see, buying format.
Do you see any with bids?
Oh, well, those are all the buy it now ones coming up first. Pre-owns. Yeah, I don't, I'm not.
So here's another way to analyze eBay. Buy it now is always priced a little bit higher. Otherwise, they would just do it as a auction. And so if you see buy it nows, a bunch of them, it usually means that is more than what it's worth. And if you see any auctions with no bids, that means not even that price is what people want it for.
Yeah. No, it's a good example. And this is what I'm lately trying to convince myself, Mike. The amount of mental thought that I have put towards this Fisher Price record player and the amount of times it's like exchanged hands between like my mom and I, like at some point my mom had it and the kids would sometimes play with it at her place. She was like going to get rid of it. And I was like, oh no, get rid of that. That's worth a lot. I'm going to sell it.
Right.
So then it's done, but my house has been sitting in a cabinet, that I see and then mentally like, makes me think about why I'm hanging on to this stuff. And even if I could get $20 for it, I'm not sure it's worth my time to do all of that right now. And this is a good one but then I'm like, well, I just want to make sure it goes to somebody who would value and appreciate it,
Mm-hmm.
So really, now that I know that that's all it's worth, all I really want is to get rid of it and give it to someone who will appreciate it. I don't even care about the money at this point.
I totally agree with you. The hassle of selling something and going through eBay and having somebody like come back and be like, oh, this is in worse condition than you said it was. It's just not worth $15 to me. And so this is actually what I did with my baseball cards, which was the first collectible that I gave away when I went through this realization. Put a notice out on Facebook in my neighborhood group, and there was a family down the street that had 5 boys, and they were like, my kids would love this as like an incentive and like a little toy. And so I gave them a whole bin of baseball cards, which I had thought was worth thousands and thousands of dollars, and it was literally worth nothing. But they love them, and they for years would write me back and be like, my kids are still loving these. We give them like a little batch every few weeks. It's great.
That's so cool. And you know what I sometimes think, especially with baseball cards, maybe low likelihood, but maybe in that set of hundreds of baseball cards, there might be a card that is worth $20. That's some sort of rare, you know what I mean? Like you could be, but do you really care? Right? Like, you know what I mean? Like, you're okay with the fact that you might have, because I think that's one thing with collectibles is people, they think of like Antiques Roadshow and they think like, well, oh, I don't know, maybe I'm sitting on something that's worth, 10 grand and some sort of rare whatever card. And yes, maybe, but maybe you'll win the lottery. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, it's a big if.
Yeah.
And it's not the reason I would hang on to something, but yet somehow it is the reason I hang on to things, which is why I am inspiring myself to get rid of this Fisher Price record player and many other similar things.
Do it.
And you know what's been like inspiring me lately?
What?
that I'm super excited about is I recently joined a buy nothing group on Facebook. And for those who don't know what this is, it's buy nothing as in BUY. So like not buying anything. And it's meant to, you can only join one in your community. So it's supposed to be like, people that live fairly close to you. I think there's like a 10-mile radius for the one I'm in. And it's meant to be people who want to give and receive. So you're not just there to take, you're just as much there to give. And I often have trouble letting go of things if I don't know that they're going to be used and valued by someone. And as long as I know someone's going to be excited to get it, I will give it to them for free, which is the whole purpose of this group. And it's been really inspiring me to get rid of some things that I had been kind of like hanging on to and being like, well, I don't know what to do with this. Like it's going to get trashed at Goodwill. It's going to end up in a landfill. Because a lot of things that you donate to Goodwill will end up in a landfill. They don't actually end up getting used. And there's a lot of research around just kind of the volume of things they get. And so anyways, I've been living this buy nothing group. I've been wanting to do it for a really long time. And then when I was at your house a few weeks ago, Mike, Britta was talking about it, your wife. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I know you know who Britta is, but thought other people might not. And she was re-inspiring me. And then I was like I was talking to someone in my neighborhood who was on it. And I was like, oh, I want to join that. And so I've been on it for like the past month or so, and I've been loving it. Check out the only thing I've actually gotten from anyone, which I'm really excited about.
Another Fisher-Price record player?
No, it's this really cute llama mug that inside cute. It says no drama. I was really excited. And I committed that I would get rid of like other mugs in exchange for this mug.
You should post this Fisher-Price record player and then put it on our social account for everybody to see you getting rid of it. Going through collectibles, I think, is going to be a painful but powerful realization about the power of letting go and how much easier it could be if you get some more information.
Mike's point, I think, is so valid, right? Likely all this stuff is not worth as much as you think it is. Go do some quick research on eBay. It takes you 30 seconds to see that, that thing you're hanging on to is not worth that much. And then decide if you really need to hang on to it or not. And my biggest guidance here and what I try to follow myself is some of these things have sentimental value, right? They, like you said, they came from, your grandfather, Mike, or they were something that you collected as a kid. But you don't need all of those things, right? So I have some of my dad's actually old office stuff also, of like this pottery cup he had that he kept his pencils on in his desk. And I love it and I keep it. But I don't need 50 of those things, right? I need a handful of those things that remind me of him and that I know I'll kind of like value and use and treasure. We end up literally keeping hundreds of things from a family member or from when we were a kid. So it's like, be selective, keep a few things and let the other things go and find places where somebody will value them, because that makes it so much easier to let things go.
Yeah. So keep 2 or 3 of your favorite baseball cards to remember your passion for collection when you were a kid.
Yeah.
Give the rest away.
Yeah.
All right. So going through the collectible psychology, I think, is a powerful realization for people and helpful for letting go. But there's a few more categories which we want to jump through relatively quickly with a little less backstory and context on them. I think the first one is that just because it cost you money doesn't make it valuable. So this is continuing the theme of the financial attachment to something, but for things that weren't part of some broader passion. And I think we're all guilty of this. We are at some event and we spend $50 on some commemorative item and we hold it for 20 years because this is a commemorative backpack from the Atlanta Olympics. And of course it's valuable because I spent money on it and now I've been holding it for a long time. But what you have to understand is that just because at the time you bought it, the supply-demand curve was at such a point where people were willing to spend $50, does not mean that it is still worth $50 or more than $50. It's likely worth $0.
Yeah. And again, if you don't need it, it doesn't really matter what it's worth. If it's not worth that to somebody else.
Right. So look at it. If it doesn't bring back a flood of joyous memories of some event and every time you touch it, you think of how great it was, you might want to consider just getting rid of it.
Yeah. I think a related point we wanted to make, Mike, is often people don't want to accept that something was a bad purchase, so they hang on to it, right? This is back to the psychology point, which is a lot of what we're trying to talk about here. Is it's another reason why you're not willing to let something go, right? Because you don't want to admit that it was probably a bad purchase and that you regret ever doing that, right? And so you continue to hold on to it. You continue to have these negative feelings about it every time you see that thing. One of my favorite things that I've heard that's a good tip for thinking about whether you should keep something or not, that's related to the cost point you just made, and also the, not wanting to accept that it's a bad purchase, is asking yourself, would I buy this thing again today if I didn't already own it? Right. So if you're, I'm looking at there's a pillow that I had sitting on this chair that was like in my guest room, but that's now in my office. And it was a pillow from West Elm, like a decorative throw pillow, which I rarely buy and don't own a lot of.
Yeah, you hate decorative throw pillows.
During some point of weakness.
You have bashed them multiple times on this show.
During some point of weakness, I bought it years ago. It still actually had the tags hanging on the back of it. And I've never used it. It's been sitting in like a guest room. Anyways, it matched like a bedspread in a guest room. So I bought it. The other day was like, I don't need this, and I don't use it. I don't value it. And I would never buy it again. If I was in that store today looking at that pillow, I would be like, no way I'd buy this pillow. Right. And it was like a $60 pillow and it still had the price tag on it. And so I put it on I sold it on our neighborhood Facebook group for $10, and somebody was very happy to come and get it. But that's a good rule of, would I buy this again today if I didn't already own it? And if the answer is no, let that shit go.
And if it helps, go check eBay, see if any of these things are actually being sold. And if it makes you feel better, sell it and get a few dollars back. It's very likely that's going to be worth nothing, though.
Yeah, it's funny. I often will do that I'll sell something for a really cheap price. But like that pillow was $60, never been touched, never been used anywhere in my home. I'd just been sitting on this chair. Still the tags on it. I sold it for $10. Somebody was super happy to get it. Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, they're probably going to regret that purchase in a little while also, but
then sell it for 50 cents.
Yeah. But I got my $10.
So the next category that you should consider letting go are all of those things that you think you may need in the future or have some practical value. And I'm sure everybody has this stuff.
These are also known as the just in case items.
Yes. Like just in case
someday
items.
I might.
And there's a whole range to this. You could have a box of paper clips and you legitimately use 1 or 2 paper clips a year for something, or a month, or it could be like some specialty baking pan in your kitchen. You're like, I might make this decorative cake sometime. So there's a whole spectrum of these things. But you can either get rid of most of them in the case of the paper clips, or get rid of those specialty items, because it is unlikely you're going to use that stuff. And let's say even if you do end up needing it in the future, let's say you were in a pinch and you're like, I have to make this specific decorative cake. And I unfortunately gave away that pan. You can just go buy another pan, but over time you will have given away 100 things and then found out one of them you actually needed, and you can go acquire it again. You don't need to keep all of this stuff forever. And
it's likely, and the minimalists have a whole rule about this. It's called the something 10, 20, 30. I don't remember the name of the rule, but it's like, if it costs under $20, don't even question getting rid of it. Cause if you had to, you could replace it for a reason, you're not getting rid of something. Like, we have a really expensive tent for our family. We don't use it that often, but if I have to buy another tent, it would cost me hundreds of dollars. Mm-hmm. And so it's like the sort of thing I'll hang on to, but paper clips, I should be able to let go. Right. And so I think it really is thinking about, the reality of you ever needing those, quote, just in case items in the future.
Yeah.
And remembering that you could rebuy them if you had to.
So the takeaway on this one is that really think about when you're going to use this item next, and what the worst case scenario would be, just to go buy a new one or pick one up from the office or do something. But think about all of the space and clutter you would be freeing up by getting rid of all of this stuff. All right, moving on. Family heirlooms is something that is going to be, I think, particularly hard, probably the hardest thing for people to get rid of. And this is something that I've been on a journey with for a long time as well. And I'm not all the way there. I still have attachment to stuff, and I'm like, I know I should give it away, but I can't. So
this is a tough one.
And I'm going to speak for you, Maggie, as well. We are not experts at this either, but I think we've made a little bit of progress in this area.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. That's kind of what I was saying at the very beginning of this episode of I am constantly struggling / aspiring to do more here, but family heirlooms is one of the most difficult categories. And the one thing I have gotten slowly better at in this category is the idea of I'm not going to keep them all. I'm going to keep some. I don't need 100 things that remind me of my dad. I need a handful of really powerful things and a few things that I know my kids will appreciate also when they get older.
And what makes this one tough is that unlike toys or collectibles, it's hard to find someone else who would appreciate it because the sentimental value is something that is usually tied to a specific story in your life. And so the item, you might recognize that it has no material value or no resale value, but you don't need it. It doesn't provide any more sentimental value to you, but you know somebody else isn't going to appreciate it. And so the one thing that I have done in the past and that I would recommend you try is get permission from somebody who was closer to the person or the event that has that sentimental attachment. And so I have some things from my grandfather, and I will call up my dad and kind of sheepishly ask him, like, listen, Dad, I'm really sorry. I held on to this thing for 15 years, but I don't think it's worth anything, and I'd rather just get rid of it. And my dad's reaction, no joke, this will not shock anybody. He's like, I'm surprised you kept it this long. Get rid of it. It's not worth anything. My dad wouldn't care. And so, having my dad speak for his dad and saying it is okay to let this go. It has served a purpose in your life and you can now get rid of it is like, what a relief.
Yeah. And it's funny when you say like, he wouldn't care. I don't care. He wouldn't care. Because whatever you believe about the afterlife and where people go when they die, I think one thing we might all be able to agree on is that they are not somewhere thinking about what you're doing with their stuff. They might be. I often think that like when I'm doing something good in my life or bad in my life, I think about, well, what would my father think of me? And is he up somewhere watching me? And, all these things. But I never am like, is he like, what'd you do with that cup from my office? You know what I mean? Like that's probably not what they're thinking about. They're thinking like, oh, I'm so proud she's a good person. I'm so proud, that she's had kids, all these things, but not the, what happened to my stuff. And even if they were, Mike, they'd forgive you for it, right? They'd understand.
Because they love you.
Yeah. Right.
And this is a good segue into our kind of last topic on this is how to prepare the next generation for your stuff. And this was something that I read a book about. I think the title of the book was Let It Go. We'll put a link in the show notes. But most of the book was about this, about the generational handoff of items and the psychological strain that it puts on people because they feel compelled to hold on to it. And one thing that my parents have been very mindful of is that they don't really have anything anymore since they left our childhood home and then, keep downsizing. They get rid of all of this stuff. And so what they plan to give to me is going to be the most important items in their life. And I'm sure that in a few years, they're going to tell me specifically, this is what I want you to keep and why. And here is what I don't want you to worry about. And so that's what I think we should all, even if we're decades and decades and decades away from hopefully passing away, we should let it know, like, what is important to us? Which are the items that we want other people to care for? And then also be willing to say, this was really important to me. I wish it was important to you, but if it's not, that's okay, because I don't want to burden you with this in the future.
I think, one of the things that I often think, Mike, it's a very sad and terrible thought, but I imagine like if I died tomorrow, this motivates me to get rid of stuff. Like, I'm like, if I died tomorrow, what would it be like for my husband, my mom, my kids, a good friend coming into my home to have to go through all the stuff I have and decide what to do with it? Aside from the fact that they wouldn't know what's important and what's not because there's so much stuff, it's a burden. I mean, I had to clean out when my father died. He had a massive like garage office, like cellar collection of just tools and a lot of them like I have and I use, but it took us just a lot of time to go through. And it was very stressful and emotional. And I didn't know what was the good stuff. And you know what I mean? Like I just had to make all these decisions and it was overwhelming to me. And if he were there, he would have been able to tell me like, hey, look, these are the only 3 things that really matter. And hey, this was your grandfather's hammer. Take this one. Yeah. I swear there were like 12 hammers. I don't know which is, you know what I mean? So I always think that about. Maybe one of them was
worth a lot of money.
No, you're right. Oh gosh. I think about if I were to die, right? Again, and just what that would be like. And it motivates me to get rid of more stuff, honestly. And it's kind of it's a terrible thought to think about, but I think it helps to put things in perspective and think, what do I want to saddle and leave everybody else with to deal with? But also I want them to know what matters. And if there's only a few things when they open, my dresser drawer that look like collectibles, they'll know that those were the things that I cared about. But when there's crap everywhere, they'll have no idea. Okay, Mike, I think we should probably wrap this discussion up and hit our top 3 takeaways. I think our first one is just the broader point that there is a lot of value in letting go of things in your life and having less stuff. It is something that we both believe firmly in and have, kind of continued to believe and aspire to more and more as we get older and just realize that stuff isn't what creates happiness.
And the second key takeaway is that most of the things that you're holding on to have no material value. And so you shouldn't let the perceived dollar value of something be the reason that you were holding on to it.
The third takeaway is the process of going through things and letting go actually helps you identify the things that are truly important to you and bring back strong memories and gives you joy. Though the process can seem daunting at times, there's so much good that can come through identifying the things that are truly important to you.
All right. This was a fun episode, Maggie. I enjoyed this.
I hope this has inspired people to let go of stuff. Don't worry so much about whether it goes to Goodwill or the Buy Nothing group or you trying to sell some of it. Just get rid of it.
So thanks everybody for listening. If you've been challenged or inspired by what you've heard, please rate and review the show. You can also subscribe to make sure you never miss an episode.
And if you have any thoughts or questions, we would love to hear from you. So you can leave us a voicemail or text us at 404-981-3370, or you can always hit us up on Instagram.
All right. Thanks, Maggie.
Thanks, Mike. Bye.
Bye.